Hello. Wonderful to see so many friends and supporters and collaborators. Welcome to this session on gender transformative education. My name is Yona Nestel. I am the Inclusive Quality Education Lead at Plan International. And before we get started, I'd like to thank our sister organizing partners, so the Global Partnership for Education and Girl Up, for our great collaboration in putting this amazing session together. We really don't have much time today, so let me just say that you will be hearing from some incredible youth leaders about their work to make gender transformative education a reality. Different facets of gender transformative education from different parts of the world. They're really walking the talk on gender equality in and through education. We will then hear from two agency leads who will share their reflections and their commitments on gender transformative education. So we really hope that you will leave today with a much more concrete understanding of what gender transformative education is, because I often hear that it's this kind of lofty feminist concept and people don't understand what it means in practice. So you're going to leave here today understanding what it is, and more importantly, that you're going to feel a sense of urgency and commitment to advance gender equality in and through education. So I'm really excited to call up to the stage our first speaker, Alliyah Logan. She's the founder of Cultivate Global Education. She's a Jamaican American from Queens, right? The Bronx, sorry. She's a youth advocate who focuses on education equity, international gender equality, and the foundation of her work is centered on advocating for young girls' education globally. So Alliyah, the stage is yours.
Hi everyone, I hope you're doing so well. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I was joking backstage that this is very Gen Z of me to be reading this from my phone instead of printing it out. And thank you so much for that very warm welcome. I'm here today to help support the conversation about education equity in schools throughout the United States and globally. Before I do just that, let's go back to 2016, my freshman year of high school. The New York City public school system is extremely discriminatory towards students of color, those experiencing poverty, those who have learning disabilities, and those a part of the LGBTQ community. For me, I knew the resources in schools in my area would not be enough for me to attend my dream college. So I decided to take over an hour and a 15-minute commute all the way to Lower Manhattan to be able to receive the resources and education that I and my peers from home deserve. Now, many of you may think that the United States is a wealthy country so that the education disparities don't exist. And in a few parts of the country, this is true. But for me and millions of young people around the country, this is not the case. The school-to-prison pipeline is the funneling of students of color from classrooms into prison cells. And students interact with the prison industrial complex in many different ways, whether that's direct or indirect. And direct ways could be through school resource officers or metal detectors, and indirect ways could be discriminatory dress codes that impact young girls of color. All students deserve access to educational resources, after-school programs, and mental health support. But according to the ACLU, 14 million students are in schools with police but no counselors, nurses, psychologists, or social workers. And I'm sure that number has grown significantly in 2022. I began my work with a focus on education equity in New York City. But after participating in the Girl Up Teen Advisory Program, I realized that this issue of education equity is a global concern. I met with young girl leaders from around the world, from the UK to Australia to Colombia, and through interpersonal conversations, I was able to better understand the way we can build a transnational movement for education equity. Now let's take a step back. I've been using the term education equity a lot here, and I wanted to define what it means to me. For me, it means that young people will have access to resources to support them and in their academic career. So let's fast forward to now, to the creation of Cultivate Global Education. CGE is an initiative that dares to ask the question, can all young people have access to safe and equitable education? Many said no, that it is impossible to fit the needs of billions of students internationally. But we dare to say yes, we can. CGE plans to assist the world with reimagining education where all young people, especially young girls experiencing poverty, are able to have access to resources in their communities to safely complete their academic careers. We enhance the leadership that young girls already have. And I always tell my peers, you can speak the way you speak and still be a leader for change. COVID-19 had a detrimental impact on girls' education. We saw that there was resources being advocating for our communities finally be given, and it took a global pandemic just to get that. I saw computers, Wi-Fi, and even meals in communities throughout New York City and New York State. 1 in 3 countries are not taking action to help students catch up when they're learning post-COVID-19 school closures. COVID-19 was our catalyst for getting more involved in work throughout the US and the UK and maintaining these new resources. I'm a strong believer of learning from others, and I wanted to share the work of Girl Up and the work they did in Guatemala. So one of the issues was that girls had access to education, but they didn't have access to safe transportation. So Girl Up supported safe transportation through a biking program to make sure they could get to and from school safely. We can advocate for girls in the US impacted by the school-to-prison pipeline, while Liz advocating for schools to be built for Afghan girls, while also advocating for infrastructure, clean water, and in rural areas. At CGE, we recognize that every continent, every country, every region has a different need when it comes to closing the gaps of education inequity. And I want to leave you with this. It is easy for us to say that education equity is too broad of an issue to advocate for. It's too much and it's too many students to fit the needs for. But in my opinion, I think we should dare to reimagine education globally, one that is trauma-informed, one that is inclusive and non-discriminatory for all students. So now you know this, I ask you with this question. What would you do to change your education? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alliyah. Thank you, that was incredible. Thanks for shining a light on the situation in the US, because a lot of these spaces we talk about developing countries, but issues of violence, school violence and gender discrimination happen right here as well. It is my pleasure to introduce our next young leader, who is a personal friend and mentor of mine, Ashlee Burnett. She's the co-chair of Transform Education. She's from the Trinidad and Tobago. She has she's doing amazing things, but let me just say that she's a 2020 Women Deliver Young Leader, founder of Femnet Caribbean, an intersectional Caribbean feminist NGO, and she leads a dynamic team of young people working to achieve gender justice in the region. So Ashlee, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's truly my pleasure to be here to speak on gender transformative education, but specifically zeroing in on SRHR and CSE. So for me, when I talk about gender transformative education, I am talking about decolonizing systems. It is ensuring that our systems are actually not oppressing human beings from wherever they are. And so over the last few months in Trinidad and Tobago, several children suffered various forms of violence at the hands of their mothers. And while social media was in a blaze with discussions criticizing the parents, there wasn't a lot of conversation around why. What are the root causes of this issue? And these parents were quite young. They were 19, they were 23 years old. They were young. I'm 24, and I can't even fathom what it takes to actually, parent a child. But when we think about the root causes, the root cause goes back to comprehensive sexuality education, which we don't get in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, at the secondary school level, in primary school. It's something that we have to learn on our own, from our own experiences, or via the internet. But this is critical to the development of people everywhere, young girls, gender diverse people, and people like me. And so when we talk about GTE, and I'm going to say GTE when I'm talking about gender transformative education, we are talking about addressing the root causes of gender inequality. Reproductive justice and bodily autonomy are the bedrock of achieving all of the Sustainable Development Goals. We can't say that we want to have, good climate action and we don't have CSE in schools. These are intersecting issues. And so when we withhold CSE from adolescents, this is a form of cultural violence. And I know, violence, how is that violence? But let's think about it. In Trinidad and Tobago, our culture is what is holding us back from actually having CSE in schools. And that's rooted in power and control, saying that this is what, as a young woman, this is what you're supposed to do with your body, procreate. And if you have access to CSE, then you're gonna be able to make a decision. Oh, I don't want to procreate, or I want to procreate. And so when we withhold that, it is a form of cultural violence because we are forcing women and girls and gender diverse people into a reality that they do not want. And so looking at the rollback of these rights in the US, and I know sometimes in the Caribbean we say that's happening in America, what does that have to do with us? But when America coughs, the Caribbean catches a cold. And so our rights have been stalled for ages. Getting access to abortions is not legal in Trinidad and Tobago, which means that a lot of young people are forced to be parents when they are not ready. But I'd like to highlight within my community what I have observed in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region is that we receive major pushback from faith-based organizations. And I want us all in this room to think about how can we get them on board? Because oftentimes, they are the ones that are sometimes, holding back progress. But I want to talk quickly about the work of Feminine Caribbean, because what we do is that we are young people that are actually leading change. And we are working towards ensuring that there's SRHR in schools. We work at a community level, and we engage rural communities with parents. And we train parents and children about CSE, about their rights, about consent, about bodily autonomy, and how they can take charge of their lives. We also work to increase the access to menstrual products. We have 9 care banks in Trinidad and Tobago. There are 7 in Trinidad and 2 in Tobago where we offer free period products. And we do workshops with teachers and with entire schools for them to be able to take back their lives. So I leave you with that question, how are we going to ensure that we engage all forms of society for us to ensure there's CSE in schools? Because that is really the core of when we think about sustainable development and achieving gender transformative education. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashlee. And what I love about what Ashlee's doing and Femnet is that you guys aren't waiting. Young people are just moving ahead. There's a need, and you're looking to fill it. So that's great. Our last youth leader is Cynthia Nyongesa. She is a 25-year-old human rights lawyer. We were just joking behind the stage. What was I doing when I was 25? I was definitely not a human rights lawyer. She's from Kenya. She's incredibly accomplished. She founded a digital platform called Cynthia Untamed, and she's also a GPE youth leader. So Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you all. I am so excited to be in this session. And let me just mention that I am standing in on behalf of my colleague, who is also a youth leader with the GPE from Zimbabwe. His name is Ashlee, and he wasn't here. He doesn't have the chance to be here today, but I have the honor and privilege to stand on his behalf. And so when we talk about gender equality and education, I think about lots of things. But let me look at my country, Kenya. In Kenya, where we recently just had elections, our president is male, our vice president is male. And generally, when you look at the system, you realize that a lot of leadership structures are all male-dominated. And when you look at the university level especially, a lot of the chancellors and vice chancellors are actually male. And being young and female in Kenya puts you at the periphery of opportunities. It makes it so difficult for you to access these opportunities. Let me give an example. A few years back, I had been invited to speak at the General Assembly, the UN General Assembly on Nelson Mandela Day. And I just needed a recommendation from my school, but the chancellor, the dean of the school, was male. And so when I went to him to get a recommendation, he told me that women my age should be married and have children and shouldn't be involved with international organizations. And so what happened is that I never got the chance to come to New York and speak at the General Assembly. But I'm glad that through many other circumstances and through the support of GPE and my education, I've had the chance to come to New York this time round. And so what does gender inequality in the classroom look like in Kenya? A few years ago, I had the chance to work as a youth advocate for UNICEF Kenya. And I often got the chance to go into the field and visit many rural schools. And what I would mostly see is that a lot of the students were male. Many of the girls were not in school because they just didn't have access to water and sanitation, and some of them had actually been married off. And that was so difficult. You can imagine a girl missing out on school just because they don't have a sanitary towel, which I think is which is why it's very crucial for our governments to invest in access to free sanitary care for all our girls. And in some communities, in many communities in Kenya, actually, and my colleague Ahmed is here, he can attest to that, girls are not really valued, and they're told that, well, you shouldn't go to school. Many of them would go to school, and they'll be told that they don't need to study the sciences because the sciences are for boys. But luckily for me, it's a different story because I had the privilege to go to a girls' national school in Kenya called Alliance Girls High School. And the story for me was different because my teachers encouraged me to take up the sciences, and they told me, you can be anything that you want to do. And we were told that there aren't any chores for boys and girls. You are actually equal, and you can do anything that you want to do. And what I'd like to see in our education systems is to see that the teaching materials in institutions need to reflect gender transformative education. And that really starts from the teachers, enabling the teachers to understand what gender transformative education means, but also the learners to understand. And just remember that in schools, we don't just work with the teachers, we also have the workers, we have the people who clean our dormitories. We need all those people to understand that our girls and all children basically should be taken care of. And that means that at the national level, we must embrace policies that ensure that there's a difference in our culture. The curriculum we've been using in Kenya for a long time has been outdated, actually, the 844 system. But the good news is that my government in Kenya has actually invested in the competency-based curriculum. And our new president, who was inaugurated the other day, maybe 5 days ago, actually announced that we're actually going to be able to review whether this system is working. So that means that in Kenya, we're not just reforming the curriculum, but we're also stopping and asking ourselves, is this going to work? Will this promote gender equality? I want to see our educators standing up as champions of education. My teacher, my deputy principal at Alliance Girls High School, Mrs. Kimei, really inspired me to do this because she would actually take up girls in the community during the holidays and stay with them during the holidays, especially those who were at risk of getting married off. And we saw them transition and finish their high school education. So please, I know she's not here, she's probably not watching, but please let's just clap for her. As I conclude, it's very important to teach our girls that they can be anything. Our textbooks must reflect that Cynthia can be a pilot, she can be a president. Let me also just acknowledge the support of the European Union in my country, in Kenya, because they gave me a chance to feature on a reality TV program called Miss President. Yes, so I got to showcase the power of education right from our classrooms to the leadership level and say that we must have gender transformative education. And that also means that we must socialize our learners to understand that this issue is critical, both in the arts and the sciences. Even as we look at sports, girls should not just play netball. They can also play football and also go up to the global level. Look at our international championships, FIFA, for example. You rarely get to see the women, and the women who participate in that are sometimes discriminated. But we've also seen many women in Kenya running as athletes, playing football and getting lots of money and being able to empower themselves. And so, when we lastly look at the community level and we ask ourselves, how can we transform gender? I think it's also very important to involve community leaders. When I was a youth advocate at UNICEF Kenya, we really worked closely with the religious leaders because a lot of these things are embedded in culture, they're embedded in religion, and if you don't go to the community level and enable the people to understand you through the community leaders, through the religious leaders, you'll often be seen as an outsider who really doesn't care about the community. You're just maybe doing a job, but make sure you involve the religious leaders, the community leaders. That's the only way we can then transform education and ensure we are starting at the grassroots level, going up to the leadership level. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, now there's two people that have been waiting backstage listening intently, and I'm going to call them out. So the first keynote listener, I'll say, is Johanna Sumuvuori. She's the State Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland. So please come take a seat. And then Margarita Licht, who's the Deputy CEO of the GPE. So you both have been backstage listening to our amazing youth leaders, the work that they're doing, the different facets of gender transformative education from the different contexts. And my question is to you, State Secretary Sumuvuori. You've listened to the presentations, and can you tell us what Finland's commitments have been to gender transformative education and what progress you've already made, and just some reflections of what you heard from the young people today?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair and dear participants and audience. It's my pleasure to be here, as gender equality and education are both issues that we in Finland try to be very good at. We actually have the society we have built, the society we are today, a Nordic welfare society. It didn't happen by accident. It actually happened because we deliberately invested in welfare society, good quality education and gender equality. We didn't have afford to leave anyone behind because we were actually a relatively poor and agrarian country after the Second World War, and we actually needed everyone on board to build that society and that prosperity we see today. Literacy was one of the key factors. How we built our know-how and skills base we have today. We have had to educate everyone to read, rich and poor, girls and boys, and we also needed after war we needed everyone's input in the workforce. We couldn't leave women behind. So I would say that the basic values in our society are gender equality and believing in education. As I have said that. And I heard that there were lots of issues that young generations are facing today in the classrooms, but also in the wider society, if you're thinking about the effects of the climate change, how it impacts your life already. We have also our problems. I know that there are different problems sometimes. We are not a poor country. But when we come to gender equality, I often hear from my foreign colleagues praising that, oh, you are so good, you're doing so well. But it's not always true. We also have certain problems, because equality is not like being relatively better than someone else. Equality is, it either is or not. It should be 50-50. So that's why we have to also look at our issues at home. And the way we have embedded gender inclusivity in our education system is that we are training our teachers, for example, to be very mindful and gender sensitive both in the curricula, how to employ the curricula, but also the classroom practices. And that's something we do very deliberately, so it's embedded in our policy documents as well. We have actually just recently updated also our national equality white paper, and of course it's streamlined to all the sectors in society, including education sector, and that's something we do every day. There are also certain things that I would say that we still need to be mindful of. For example, I think I heard here mentioned sexual and health, reproductive and rights. That is something that I remember, like from Finland in the 90s, that we had teenage pregnancies a little bit in the rise in Helsinki region. I happened to be a local councillor at that time, so I remember it quite well. And actually, it coincided with the fact that the comprehensive sexuality education had been cut off a bit, not completely, but there had been made some budgetary cuts. So I think it has implications how we invest in certain issues. We have to look at the budgets, we have to look at our practices, and what I would like to say, if I may say this last thing, I have been having lots of discussions with youth activists from around the world, because we are the first country to outline youth peace and security national agenda. They say that they are not only the futures of the generations of the future, that young activists and generations, they are futures of today. So we have to have this inclusivity in the decision-making tables, and always say, stand up as the candidates, run up for politics, or whatever it is. You have to be decision makers of today, not for the future only. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Margarita, I'll move to you now. What did you hear from these amazing young women, and what is the GPE doing to further gender equality in and through education?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to say I feel really privileged to be on the stage with these amazing young leaders. It's really amazing to share the stage with you. We've heard from these amazing young leaders and from others in the course of these events so much about the obstacles to gender equality and to education for young girls and women. We've also heard a lot about the solutions. And we have so much evidence. We don't need any more evidence to know the impact of education on individuals, on families, and on societies as a whole. So when in GPE we say that we are hardwiring gender into everything we do, that's to turn all that knowledge into action. And that's what we need to do. And the way that we do that in GPE is that we first recognize that these actions have to be context-based. So we work with our partner countries and support them to analyze the gender issues in their societies and in their schools and the obstacles that girls and women face, to diagnose even further, to figure out what is it that's blocking, and then to develop context-based effective solutions based on evidence. Moreover, we work to convene partners around those solutions. We have to act as a community, as a partnership, to support system-wide actions, not a little project here and there, but system-wide actions. And we put our money behind it. Right now we have about 33 projects to the amount of about $1.5 billion supporting girls' education activities. We have created a new grant mechanism called the Girls Education Accelerator to add funding for girls' education. We have our Knowledge and Innovation Exchange Program, which, among other things, supports countries to devise gender-sensitive teacher training. We have in DRC and in El Salvador, we're supporting these countries in changing curriculum materials, testing materials, the content of education to remove negative gender stereotypes. And we are also have our Education Out Loud, our civil society grants, which supports civil society organizations, including civil society organizations that work on gender issues, to give them space and amplify their voice in policy dialogue, And that includes young voices as well. Out of all the education coalitions that we support, about 93% of them have youth representatives. And so we are supporting youth to have a voice in the policy dialogue in their countries. We support rural youth to build their capacity to advocate for education. So we're doing a lot, but we need to do more. And I just want to end, if I can, with why is it so important to have these youth voices? Why are we working with rural youth in particular, who are excluded from often from social media and don't have the same access as other youth? And to explain that, I'm going to go back in time a little bit to when I was a little bit younger, not as young as you. I was working in Ethiopia, in rural Ethiopia, on interactive educational radio for young people, where we gave young people very simple things. Knowledge of what the law is about the age of marriage for girls, knowing about their education rights. And this was interactive, so these youth groups formed in the rural communities, fed back the actions that they took to the radio and shared it, so it was spreading in the communities. And just as an example, when a girl was a father was telling her daughter that she was going to be taking out of school to get married, this youth group would show up at their doorstep and say, "Excuse me, but that's against the law." And if the father didn't listen, they would go to the police and they would say, "Excuse me, but you're supposed to apply the law, and this guy's about to break it." And that just shows you the power that young people can have, and we need to continue to support young people to have that power. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita, for those really tangible examples of what GP is doing. I have 1 minute. That clock is making me very nervous. So I wanted to end by thanking all our speakers and also sharing a quote from my favorite feminist scholar, Bell Hooks, who said, "We must celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education the practice of freedom." And friends, gender transformative education is the practice of freedom. It's freedom from gender stereotypes, from harmful gender norms, and we need your support. So please join a movement for gender transformative education. We need people to be pushing for this at the country level, at global level, with leaders here at the Transforming Education Summit and all around the world. So thank you very much. Thanks to our speakers.